The Last Mapmaker by Christina Soontornvat, a first chapter Friday read aloud video with The Word Nerd. Summer is a great time for books about the ocean. This month I'll be reading 4 of them: The Last Mapmaker, Deep Blue, The Neptune Project, and my very own book, Breaking the Surface. Come back each week in June for one of these adventurous stories. Today, as you listen, watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down, word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Hi, my name is Amanda Zeba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week, I'm going to be sharing with you The Last Mapmaker by Christina Soontornvat. Now, this book is special for a bunch of reasons, but what's special specifically about this book that I hold in my hand is that it's an A.R.C, otherwise known as Advanced Reader Copy. Sometimes publishers and authors send out early copies of their book to people in the bookish community to help spread the word and build up some hype about it. But now that this book is out in the real world, I do want to share it with you so that you can get your hands on it and enjoy this fabulous story. I didn't get a chance to interview Christina about this book, but I did get to ask her questions about her story, A Wish in the Dark. So if you want to hear a conversation with Christina, you can click on this video right here and watch that one. But stay tuned until the end of this video, because even though there's not an interview there are a bunch of goodies that came along with my advanced reader copy of this story, and I'm going to share them with you then. But for right now, I'm going to read you the back so you know what this story is about, and then I'm going to read you not only the first chapter, but the second one as well, and then we'll get to those goodies afterwards. Here we go. The Last Mapmaker by Christina Soontornvat. In a fantasy adventure every bit as compelling and confident in its world building as her Newbery Honor book, A Wish in the Dark, Christina Soontornvat explores a young woman's struggle to unburden herself of the past and chart her own destiny in a world of secrets. As assistant to Mangkon's most celebrated mapmaker, 12-year-old Sai plays the part of a well-bred young lady with a glittering future. In reality, her father is a low-life con man, and in a kingdom where status of one's ancestors dictates social position, this truth could ruin her. Sai seizes the chance to join an expedition to chart the southern seas, but she isn't the only one with secrets aboard the ship. When Sai learns that the expedition might be headed for the fabled Sunderlands, a land of dragons, dangers, and riches beyond imagining, she must weigh the cost of her dreams. Vivid, suspenseful, and thought-provoking, this tale of identity and integrity is as beautiful and intricate as the maps of old. So let's dive right in to this ocean story. Chapter 1, A Golden Morning. I must have looked like all the other assistants standing in line for breakfast that morning at the Three Onions Cafe. We all wore the same starched white shirts, gray trousers, and stiff black cotton aprons with deep pockets. The assistant's uniform was meant to put each of us on the same level, making us equals for the 1 year we would spend in service. What a joke. We may have worn the same clothes, but it was still clear as glass where we stood. We knew without asking who among us had carriages and who had to walk, whose mothers held important positions on this or that council, and which of us had maids and which ones had to clean out their own bed pots. No one ever said anything, but we knew. I lingered at the back of the line, doing my impression of the shy girl, feet tilted inward, head tipped down, looking like someone who had nothing to add to the conversation. You could learn more about people if they didn't think you were worth talking to, and I had a whole list of other details I needed to pay close attention to if I was going to play along with them. Hair, combed free of lice and braided lovingly by my mother, or even better, by my maid. Fingernails cleaned out and filed. Shoes, the right kind, purchased from the right shop, shined and with nothing icky sticking to the soles. Spine held straight as if I were proud of where I came from and had a bright future to look forward to. Grumble. I coughed to mask the sound of my growling stomach. A full belly was the one thing I couldn't fake, and coming to the Three Onions in the morning only made the grumbling worse. The steam in the wood-paneled restaurant smelled of fresh oysters, chopped garlic, and green herbs. It took real effort not to stick out my tongue and lick the air. Something felt different from the other mornings, though. The kids in line were more chatty than usual. A tall assistant leaned her elbow on the counter while the others pressed in close, hanging on her words. I called her Tippy because of the way she tipped her head back to look down at the rest of us. I didn't know much about her except that she worked for a master pastry chef near the Temple Square. Tippy had always been popular and pretty, but that morning she was glowing. She laughed and smoothed her long braid over her shoulder. The light from the cafe windows bounced off something golden and shiny at her wrist. So that was it. A lineal. A pang of jealousy worked its way into my empty stomach. She must have turned 13 the day before. The other assistants pushed in closer to gape at Tippy's golden bracelet. "Hold it up so we can all see," said one of them. "Oh, it's so pretty." The others oohed and awed as Tippy held up her wrist and gave the bracelet a little jangle. "How many links is that?" "5?" asked another girl, unable to hide the envy in her voice. That spring she had been the first among us to get her lineal. She touched it now self-consciously, 4 golden loops hanging from a brooch pinned to her blouse. Tippy answered a little too loudly. "Actually, it's 7. Everyone murmured and pressed in closer to count the golden rings of her bracelet for themselves. Each link in a lineal represented one generation of ancestors, ancestors whose names you knew, ones you were proud to claim. In my mind, I let out a snort. With a background that fine, what was she doing as a baker's assistant? Suddenly I realized that all the eyes in the cafe had turned to me. Tripe. At least I thought I'd snorted in my mind. Tippy narrowed her eyes at me. "You, at the back of the line. What's your name?" "Order 49, shouted a shrill voice behind the counter. Thank the heavens. I squeezed past the girls to get to the counter and then bowed to Mrs. Noom and took the container of porridge from her. "Thank you, ma'am," I said in the meekest version of my shy girl voice. "I'd better be going. I'm already late." I could feel the other assistants' eyes on me as I passed. I knew they were sizing me up. They couldn't look down their noses at me until they figured out which rung of the ladder I stood on. And what if they knew the truth? That I wasn't even on the ladder? That in a few months when I turned 13 there wouldn't be so much as a cake crumb, let alone a lineal celebration? I had no proud family line, no noble ancestors. There was exactly one link to my past, and it certainly wasn't made of gold. If they knew the truth, they would think I was nothing. And who could blame them? Chapter 2. The Master Mapmaker. Steam billowed behind me as I burst out of the cafe door. It had rained the night before, and the sky still shimmered like a sardine's belly. Before heading up the street, I stopped to say good morning to the cafe owner's mother. She was in her usual spot on the side of the porch of the cafe, but instead of sitting in her chair, she stood leaning on her cane, her wrinkled face turned out to sea. "Good morning, Grandmother Noom," I said softly. She couldn't see anymore, but the woman could hear like a fox. I put my hand over hers, touching the dark green lines of faded tattoos that snaked up her wrist and disappeared into her sleeve. Grandmother Noom had been a merchant sailor when she was younger. I like to imagine her as a pirate. "Can you smell the sea from here, Grandmother?" I asked. "I can always smell her," she said without turning her head to me. "Do you hear them?" "Hear what?" "The hammers, ringing down in the harbor," she said in a hoarse whisper. I listened but couldn't make out anything over the sound of people talking in the cafe and greeting one another on the street. Grandmother turned her eyes to me, looking past my face. "They're readying the boats," she whispered. "I can hear 'em yammerin' and hammerin', the copper to the hulls. We're going to war again." I patted her papery hand. I'd only ever known her to be sharp as a tack. Maybe her age was finally catching up to her. "I'm sorry," I said. "I have to go or I'll be late." I helped her back to her chair and bowed even though I knew she couldn't see it. I crossed the street and headed uphill toward the paper district. I turned onto Plumeria Lane, holding the porridge steady as I climbed the narrow stone steps. Up I went past the bookshop, the papermaker, the calligrapher, the other bookshop, and the art dealer. All along the way, tidy shopkeepers and tidy aprons were busy sweeping out the front steps of their stores. This had to be the cleanest street in the city of Anlung. The only thing allowed to litter the ground here were the pink and white blossoms of the plumeria trees that hung over the shop windows. In a place this serene, how could anyone believe we were going back to war? After 2 decades of fighting every neighbor in striking distance, the kingdom of Mangkon was bigger and stronger than ever. We finally had peace. We had security. Which meant I actually had a good job for once. At the top of the hill, the Temple of 9 Islands loomed over the street. The monks had come back from their morning walk by now, and they began ringing the temple bells, deep and slow. I was still early for work, but my feet skipped every other step until I finally reached the shop. Over the front window, a cotton banner swayed gently in the morning breeze. The words painted on the cloth read, Paiyun Wangyai, Master Mapmaker. I twisted my key in the front door and closed it softly behind me. As I slipped off my shoes, I breathed in deep. For a brief moment, the smell of the shop filled me up and erased my hunger. It was the smell of crisp new sheets of paper, stacked by me, day-old ink, mixed by me, freshly washed wooden floors, scrubbed by me, and tangy brass instruments, polished by me. My heart beat a little faster as I pulled open the shades. This was my favorite part of the day. Golden sunlight spilled into the shop, illuminating the framed maps that covered the walls from floor to ceiling. Master Paiyun had been the master mapmaker of the Mangkon Royal Navy for more than 20 years, the entire duration of the longest war. He had sailed all over the known world, charting more of it than anyone in Mangkon. The sheer cliffs of the Hinder Range, the puzzle-piece islands of the Padu Archipelago, the ice-clogged shores of Wilna, and the tiny, distant Machka. Paiyun was the last mapmaker of his kind, still working in Anlung. He used old-fashioned map-making techniques, drawing coastlines as intricate as a lace collar. This meant that he worked slowly, but in the end, each map was exquisite enough to hang in a museum. Some people in Anlung said that map would draw the pebbles on the beach if he had a pen fine enough. Others said the spirits must have blessed him with the gift of far sight. And still others said, in frightened whispers, Stay away from that old Paiyun. Everyone knows he sold his soul to a demon in exchange for his map-making talent. I liked that one best. The shop door creaked open behind me. I set down the breakfast porridge and bowed as the master mapmaker walked in. Blast it, Sai, you are always early. He scowled at me worse than if I had been late. His arms were full of papers, and I rushed to help him before they all scattered to the floor. Windows, windows, he chided to me. You keep this place too stuffy. Master Paiyun slipped off his jacket and tossed it to me. He shuffled, belly out, to the counter at the back of the shop while I cracked the windows. I heard him groan as he bent to reach the lower cabinets. Not exactly the image of someone who made bargains with demons. I still hadn't figured out how old Paiyun was, but his slow shuffle and his snow-white ponytail put him at least in his 70s. I joined him at the counter where he had poured the porridge into 2 ceramic bowls. He didn't thank me for getting it, just handed me my portion. I started to take a sip. No, Paiyun interrupted. You can't eat it like that. Here. He reached for the spicy vinegar and ladled 2 big scoops into my bowl. Now eat. Yes, sir. I was used to his scolding by now, but when I first started my assistantship, I was sure I was about to be fired every 5 minutes. It had taken me all these months to realize that no matter how much Paiyun grumbled at me, my job was probably safe. 7 months ago, when the peace declaration was signed, Paiyun did what every shop owner in Anlong did. Finally hired someone to help out. After so many years of having to go without, the whole city was in a rush to get back to normal business. I had been working for one of the shrimp stalls in the Gold Hope Harbor Market and had just dropped off a delivery on the other end of Plumeria Lane. As I passed Paiyun's shop, a teenage boy burst out the front door, his clothes covered with ink and his face full of terror. Paiyun chased the boy away, shouting that he had ruined 2 months of hard work with his sloppiness. Then the mapmaker bellowed into the street. Doesn't anyone around here know how to use a blasted ink pen? I raised my hand. I was hired on the spot. Paiyun must have been desperate. Usually assistantships were arranged by family connections. If he hadn't been in such a hurry to hire someone, my job would have gone to one of those stuck-up kids I stood in line with at the cafe every morning. I knew how lucky I was, but I was still ready to bolt if Paiyun ever started asking too many questions. So far, he hadn't asked me any questions about my life at all. He always paid me on time, and even though he was grumpy as an itchy old cat, he was never cruel. It was the best job I ever had. I raised the steaming bowl to my lips and took a slow sip. The porridge was mushroomy, oniony, and fishy, and yes, I had to admit that it was better with the spicy vinegar. If demons really did bargain for souls, I would have sold mine to eat that porridge every day. Master Paiyun slurped his portion down, wiped his fluffy mustache with his handkerchief before reaching into his waistcoat pocket. Too much work to do and never enough time to do it, he grumbled as he shuffled to his desk. He said this so often that I considered it his morning prayer. He brought out a polished gold disc and with a quick snap of his fingers flipped open the hatch. He swiveled the glass lens out from its case. held it up to the light of the window, and began his morning ritual of cleaning it. The glass had a faint golden tint to it, and in the sunlight it glowed like a shard of amber. This was Paiyun's eyeglass, his most important tool. He used it to magnify the tiny pen strokes on his map paper, but it could also be used to see far in the distance. I always wanted to look through it, but I had never gotten up the courage to ask. Paiyun's lineal, a long chain of squarish gold links, ran from his eyeglass case to a clip on his waistcoat, a much more impressive way of wearing it than a dinky bracelet, in my opinion. I'd never gotten close enough to count the links, but there had to be at least a dozen. Normally, he would launch right into giving me orders for the day, but this morning he stared out the window as he cleared the eyeglass over and over. I grabbed my notebook and pencil and walked closer to his desk. Master Paiyun, shall we go over the daily schedule? There was another delivery of boxes yesterday, but they're so light I think they must be empty. Should I just set them in the back? What? Oh, yes, put them in the closet and I'll deal with them later. You still have to finish writing your lecture for the university. We have that order for the Ko-Tang maps, and the Naval Secretary has asked if you can finish a new chart of Hinmark by September. One result of winning a war meant that all the conquered places got new names, which was a pretty good deal for someone in the map-making business. Paiyun curled his lip as if he'd gotten a whiff of bad fish. Waste of time. They'll just have to change names back again after the next war. Yes, sir. And I guess you do have a lot of work on your list already. I tapped my pencil against my notebook. Maybe you should focus on writing that lecture, and I could work on making the copies of your map of Ko-Tang. Master Paiyun suddenly swiveled to look at me. His eyes, which had stared blankly out of the window a moment ago, were now focused very keenly on my face. Make copies of my maps? Do you think you could? I had traced copies of other people's charts for him before, simple things that were beneath the master's skills, like the chart of the fishing channel in the pristine bay or a road of some backwater province. But even though I had been working for him for 6 months, I have never been trusted to recreate one of Paiyun's precious maps. I only thought I was just trying to help, sir. Paiyun stared at me the same way he had stared out the window, as if he were trying to see past the horizon. He picked up his pen and held it out to me. Show me. I looked down at the pen and then back at his face. He was acting so strangely. Was this some kind of test? The first rule of being an assistant is humility. An assistant must never boast that they can do the work of their master. I swallowed my pride and cast my eyes down at my shoes. I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what I was thinking. Of course, that's far beyond my skills. Paiyun's bushy white eyebrows furrowed to meet in one line. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get out a word, our doorbell jingled. He shooed me towards the front. That's the post. I'm expecting something, Sai. Quickly, to the door. Relieved not to be in trouble, I hurried to the front of the shop. I swung open the door and nodded to the delivery girl before taking the mail from her. There was just one letter. I could tell from the thickness of the paper that it was from someone important. Master Paiyun sliced through the envelope with his penknife. I started clearing away our breakfast, keeping my eyes on his face as he read the letter to himself. As he scanned the paper, deep wrinkles set into his forehead. What does it say, sir? Paiyun looked up as if he'd forgotten I was there. What? Oh, nothing. Just an invitation to some frilly luncheon at the Naval Academy, that's all. He waved the letter back and forth as though it wasn't important, but the wrinkles on his forehead stayed put. He pointed to the counter behind me. Back to work with you, he said gruffly. We both wasted enough time this morning. As I set to work washing out inkwells from the day before, I snuck a glance at old Paiyun. He sat back in his chair, flicking the eyeglass in and out of his gold case, staring at the drawer where he had placed the envelope. That letter was no luncheon invitation. Paiyun might have been the master mapmaker, but when it came to lying, I was the expert. All right, if you want to read more of The Last Mapmaker and find out what Sai and Master Paiyun are up to, grab a copy from your school library, your local indie bookstore, or you can purchase it via the link down in the description box. Now, before I go, I want to read you a little bit more. I told you that this was an A.R.C, an advanced reader copy, and with it, in my mailbox came a bunch of other things. So part of it was this guide, and in this guide, is a note from the author. And so I want to read that to you now so that you get a little bit more background and insight into the story. I also want to tell you that there's a teacher's guide for this book. I'll put the link for that in the description box as well, but it lists 12 discussion or journal write questions that you can use as a class. And it also comes with 7 additional activities that you can do with this book. A lot of them are to do with maps and map making, both old ones and new ones and made up ones. There are also some figurative language activities, some character Venn diagram activities, and also there's some really great social studies connections, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that in this letter. So here is a note from the author, Christina Soontornvat. I started working on this book 8 years ago when I was in the middle of making a seismic shift in my life. I was about to leave my steady job in the science museum field and make the leap to writing children's books. I hadn't been published yet, despite years of trying, and I desperately wanted to be a published author. I was thinking a lot about ambition and what we're willing to go through to get the things we want most in the world. And so this story about a young mapmaker's apprentice who will do anything to escape her past and go after her dreams was born. I have written this book and rewritten it more times than any other project I've worked on. It has gone from third person to first person. The main character changed from a girl to a boy and back again. And the world building went through a complete overhaul, but at its heart, this book has always been about the secrets we keep from the world and the secrets we keep from ourselves. And what better setting to explore secrets than on the open sea? The ocean is beautiful, inspiring, mythic. It is also brutal and unforgiving, and it will force you to face up to your fears and own your own flaws like no other place on earth. And it's home to dragons. At least that's what the old maps say, right? One of my earliest critique partners advised me to add more dragon to this story, and it was just about the best advice I ever got. So yes, there is definitely something scaled and serpentine lurking in the depths below. The Last Mapmaker is heavily influenced by some of my favorite seafaring books from my childhood, like C.S. Lewis's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader and The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle by Abby. And like any story about exploration and discovery, this one confronts the destructive arrogance of colonialism. That's that social studies connection I was telling you about. My hope for this book is that it sweeps young readers away and makes them taste salt on their tongue and feel wind in their hair. I hope that it surprises them in the way that writing it has surprised me. So, just like Christina, I hope you enjoyed this book, The Last Mapmaker, and that you come back again for another First Chapter Friday with me, Amanda Ziba, the Word Nerd. Happy reading! To continue reading The Last Mapmaker by Christina Soontornvat, check out a copy from your school library, purchase one from a local indie bookstore, or grab one via the link in the description box below. Also, don't forget to check out the Teacher's Guide. There's so much goodness there waiting for you. This week's mystery quote says, "I have made many mistakes in my long life, but believing in you was never one of them." Come back each week in June for more great oceanic adventurous stories. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for future First Chapter Friday read-alouds and more great educational content for your middle grade classroom. See you again next time!